Perfect. Now, good morning, everyone. A very warm welcome on behalf of the World Economic Forum. I'm very pleased to have you all here on this very exciting topic. It's super cold outside. I saw minus 13. I guess you're slowly unfreezing now. But we have a hot topic to focus on, and this is really about how do we get the industry into net zero direction. And we do this really looking on a very active, driven example by the Global Impact Coalition. And I can tell you, I've been sitting on the other side in the private sector, and I had the privilege to co-found and to co-develop this initiative to the stage where we are. And we've done this in an incubation phase by the World Economic Forum for 2.5 years. And there was an important moment of time when we asked, dear industry, do you want to go ahead? And there was a crowd of industry companies who said, yes, we strongly believe in collaboration. We strongly believe in joint action. Let's keep this going. And this is why we're here, to learn more about the Global Impact Coalition and the work the initiative is aiming for. I wish you a good session, and I'm handing over to Bob.
Excellent. Thank you, Stefan. And it is, I think as Stefan highlighted the history, it's exciting to see where we are today. You know, I think when I joined SABIC in 2019, that was the year we had really the first low carbon emitting technology session. And although we came to a great place in terms of collaboration, I know that there were a lot of parties that were trying to figure out, can we work together? Can we build trust? Is this worthwhile to bring these parties together? And those first sessions were not all smooth. But I think that we learned a lot about where innovation can play, how to set up the right thoughts around policy, how to develop the right kind of collaboration models across our sector and outside of our sector as well. And so, you know, obviously we did a good enough job that Stefan left to join the World Economic Forum, so I guess that was a positive. But in terms of where we are, I think we've laid a great foundation. But I think that's part of why we're here today. Is a foundation is just a foundation. You know, we now are at a stage where, for the industry, you know, which, you know, approximately 6% of global emissions, the chemical industry is a significant player in terms of addressing the challenges of decarbonization, and even more so for them just the emissions from our sector. Our materials touch over 95% of the products that are out there in the world. So not only do we have to address our own emissions, we have to address and support the addressing of emissions through many other sectors with chemical technology. So it's an exciting group I have here today. I just want to maybe just do a quick round of introductions. We have Matthias from BCG, Rich coming to us from ClearPoint as the CEO, Andrea Brown, who comes from Lyondell, Basel is the Chief Sustainability Officer, and Gökhan as well, who comes to us from Sabanci. So you have a representation of industry, consulting, policy, you know, technology, sustainability driven initiatives. So I think it's a good, diverse panel, hopefully, that can give their perspectives on what they see of this challenge for the chemical sector. Hopefully we can address, I think, a few key points. You know, what's needed to build trust and collaboration, which is a key theme of WEF this year, across our industry, but also across the value chain. But also, you know, what are the barriers, right? What are the things that are getting in the way of us taking the right steps forward? What are the enablers that could come in the next 2 to 3 years that can really help position us for the right steps? And what do we need to do differently to make this happen and to convert these plans into true actionable steps? So maybe just to kick us off, I'd love to just get some reflections from the group. I mean, you know, we're all here hopefully at the beginning of a rich Davos week. You know, what are your reflections on the challenge for the chemical sector and the challenges that we have ahead of us? Maybe starting with you, Matthias.
Yeah, very, very happy to do so. So I advise chemical companies across the globe. So I happen to see a lot, and I think I see 3 key challenges we do need to overcome. One is, at the end of the day, the consumer or the customer needs to pay, or there is a a willingness to pay element in here. Now, we do see some development there. There is a little bit more openness to do so because people do see there are supply shortages for some of the bio-based materials. There is also an increasing awareness that some of the easy levers are gone. So on the willingness to pay side is a key prerequisite. There is also some progress. The second thing is, I think what's really important is that we progress on the product carbon footprinting to sort of have reliable data to hold people to account. It also goes to the theme of trust. And the third thing I do see is that also on the regulation side, there is some need for progress. We saw some of it on the SBTi side with the accountability for chemical recycling, but there is still more work to do, right? So all three, I think, are areas: the consumer, the willingness to pay, the standards, the product carbon footprint, and then regulation and developments where we need progress. Some has been made, but we need maybe more.
Yeah, great points.
Yeah.
Rich, anything from your side?
Well, I would add to that. So my organization, ClearPath, focuses on decarbonization policy across a number of sectors. So clean power, carbon management, and increasingly the industrial sector. And I would say my observation from working across those sectors is that the industrial sector broadly and chemicals within that are behind on a number of dimensions in the decarbonization journey from the other sectors. So I think they're behind simply on public understanding, despite globally industrial emissions being the largest source of emissions in the world collectively. And in the US, they've now become second, headed to first source of emissions soon. I think they're certainly behind on technology. We're where wind energy was maybe 10 or 15 years ago, I think, when we look at many of the technologies to decarbonize the chemical sector specifically, or broadly the industrial sector. And lastly, we're certainly behind on policy in the US. So this is the place where there's been the least policy making in the US. We finally have a start. So we have finally started down the road of industry-specific demonstrations at scale of new decarbonizing technologies. And we have a number of deployment incentives which will be helpful for industrial decarbonization and chemical decarbonization specifically, but we're far behind on all of that as well relative to the other things. The good news is, though, that because the conversation is starting later, it's in many ways a less contentious conversation than decarbonizing the power sector, the transportation sector have been in the US. So from my perspective, trying to get things done in DC, that is a blessing, that it is a much more less contentious, frankly, more boring conversation than the other sectors.
Excellent. Andrea, maybe coming from the petrochemical sector, how do you reflect on the challenges that certainly companies like Sabic and Lyondell are facing?
Yeah. So for those who don't know us, which hopefully many in this room do, so we're one of the largest chemical companies in the world. And I think very similar to what Matthias was mentioning. So this customer willingness to pay for us is critical. We're a large polymer producer, so we've started to see that in the plastic space, particularly around circularity, mechanical recycling, bio-based feedstocks, et cetera. But I think this low carbon willingness to pay is, we feel, probably going to come later, but it's absolutely critical for us to help make the investment case for some of the technologies that we know that will be critical for our decarbonization pathway towards net zero. So all of these things, along with the right policy frameworks, all of that has to happen kind of together, and we have to understand the pace that change will happen, so we're also not too far ahead and not too far behind. And so the complexity of all of that, within a large organization and in a system is, I think, the critical pieces that probably we're all struggling with. But I think opportunities like the GIC and other platforms kind of help us also understand some of those complex trends and challenges that we all face.
No, I think great point. And I think certainly, my reflection on the GIC is that it's been a great opportunity for learning from all the other members, right, of how we're addressing those challenges. Maybe from the Sabancı perspective, how do you see the challenge, and maybe talk a bit about your role and how that impacts you within the company and what you're trying to drive?
Sure. Actually, in many, Sabancı Group is a very well diversified conglomerate. Actually, in many industries, it is easy to decarbonize by just using the renewable energy. waste heat recovery, or some other types of energy efficiency, and that is possible and can be done, and these are quick wins. But when it comes to chemical industry, I guess it is not easy because it's a very complex industry, and we need to have new technologies and invest into new technologies to make it happen. And we have to include carbon capture. We have to include clean feedstock. We have to also include recycled materials into that. And all those require new technologies. And I guess according to McKinsey research, to stay within the boundaries of 1.5 centigrade Celsius, we need to increase the capacity of hydrogen electrolyzers by 200 times, and CCUS, carbon capture, usage and storage, by 100 times by 2030. So in order to do that, I think the only way is to invest into new technologies, and these new technologies are very expensive at the moment. And that requires collaboration among the existing players, and to bring those players together and maybe jointly invest and co-invest into these new technologies. I think that's very critical from the perspective of the chemicals industry. And I think the use of AI might also be another element that can be added on that. We can use AI for advanced predictions and monitoring. We can use it to enhance collaboration between the researchers and get more access to the developing technology. Those are the two major things in my opinion.
Yeah, no, excellent points. And I think the comment on the investments needed, and certainly the growth that has to happen to deliver some of these technologies is a great reason why I think the GSE has a role, right? Because collaboration is probably going to be the best way to de-risk some of those technologies and also to share in some of the pain for the investment.
I hope so.
As well. So maybe kicking off into the questions, maybe just starting, Matthias, with you. We talked a bit before the session, and it kind of came out in your comments, this transparency topic, the product carbon footprinting. I'd love to hear from you, and then maybe from some of the others in the group here. How do you see the chemical sector? You look at it as a consultant, looking maybe from the outside in at the industry. Do you feel like our level of transparency and reporting is where it needs to be? Are there areas where we need to increase investment, increase our direction? What's the perspective on the chemical industry at this point?
It's a good question. So if we would like to increase trust, right, which is, I think it was a frequent theme, right, to enhance the collaboration, I would see two things as being really helpful. One is, I think it's actually probably just get some examples going so that people see that this is happening. Take, for example, if you take a car, for example, right? There are so many different types of chemicals in that end product. Not a single player alone can recycle it, right? And maybe with the GIC and others, I think there is we can get things going where people collaborate in order to get a meaningful recycling piece going. And if we could do that, I think it would serve as an example that here it happens, and it would help to increase trust elsewhere. And then to build on what you said on the second thing is, I think, reliability of data, to have clarity. And I think some of the technologies here, we see product carbon footprinting happening in many sectors, not just chemicals, but also steel and others. And maybe unifying behind a common set of standards. That's probably the one thing that is missing today. We could meaningfully advance. So that will really be a step forward, I would say. So those examples, but then also leverage technologies that exist around product carbon footprint and come to that unified set of standards.
Any others who want to comment on that? Andrea, you want to?
I could talk about this topic all day. I won't, but this is an area I've been working on for a really long time, and I think one of my previous roles in another organization, sort of similar organization to the World Economic Forum, I led a chemical industry project, and one of the questions that we asked along the value chain was why are more sustainable solutions not getting into the market faster? And one of the things we heard from those value chain companies was lack of trust in the information and the data. Yep. And so I think what we're seeing now is much more convergence around common ways of measuring, common platforms for disclosing that data, and also solutions like blockchain to kind of allow that data to be shared in a more secure way. And so all of that sort of coming together also helps the industry to be able to, meet that willingness to pay, because that willingness to pay also has to have faith that it's truly a low carbon product, a better, more sustainable product. And so, we're very engaged in groups like Together for Sustainability, which brings together many of our industry around many issues, but one of those being common methodologies for product carbon footprinting. But we're also engaged in lots of other sort of industry activities to bring more convergence from the chemical industry into things like sectoral decarbonization guidance and these sorts of things. So I think all of that is important, and that's happening also in lots of other sectors. And so, I think by the end of the decade, it's still going to take a while, but by the end of the decade, we're going to see much, much more use of this data along the value chain to really make buying decisions, across many different segments. So.
No, great comments. Maybe just pivoting a bit. When we started the low carbon emitting technologies platform within the WEF, it really started out as a technology initiative, right? So we brought a lot of technology experts from the different companies. We put together a portfolio of projects, and I think what we clearly recognized during that journey is, technology projects are good, but they're not the only way, and actually they're not sufficient to solve the problems. Policy is a big piece of the equation, and making sure that your technologies are aligned well with the right policy enablements as well. I know you, Rich, you've got a lot of experience in this space, and if you've been successful at implementing and influencing in DC, then I'm sure you've got some good input for us there. But I'd love to hear your thoughts, especially because you started, from what I heard earlier, more in the energy sector and then transitioning into industrials. Are there things that we can learn from what has worked and what hasn't worked on the energy sector, and how we should think about what's needed for chemicals?
I think there are lessons. So if you think about the deployment pathways that low carbon power technologies have had, they started with a lot of basic research and demonstration programs. So in the US, for example, heavy investments at our national laboratories in what eventually became photovoltaic solar cells, instruments like the German feed-in tariffs, and in 2009, at the time, the stimulus package that set up the first wave of large-scale utility-scale solar plants in the US. Significant regulatory reform to enable those things to happen. So, for example, we made it very, very easy to build solar farms on public lands in the United States. Anyone who does business or develops things in the US knows that we have a devilish regulatory system, and getting things like that built is complex. And then lastly, trade mechanisms and export credit and all that to sort of get these things out into the world. And I think we've got a start on pieces of that now with respect to chemicals. So on the I think lots of things have moved through the early R&D. And so now, to your point, we need public cost shares in the much more expensive, larger projects to prove that these things work at scale. In the US, for example, we have a program called the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program. And to everyone's surprise, one of the two Advanced Reactor Award winners, a high-temperature gas reactor technology, did not decide to produce in the power sector. Instead, it's partnering with Dow to decarbonize a very large chemical facility in Texas, because they'll be able to take advantage of both the clean heat stream and the clean electricity stream coming off of these high-temperature gas reactors. So we have these demonstration incentives starting, but I'd be the first to say we need a much more robust program for that, both in the US and I think globally. Right now, it's a little bit piecemeal. It's not terribly well structured. The US Department of Energy, for example, buries the chemical sector deep down into a sub-program of a sub-program, despite it being a significant share of our national emissions. And so its profile really needs to be greatly elevated. And then last, on deployment incentives, again, very piecemeal. We have a number of incentives now, things like for carbon capture. There's now a robust tax incentive in the US for carbon capture. So in some sense, the leading one in the world is called 45Q. We have other incentives for specific kinds of clean electricity, and eventually for all clean electricity, which will enable decarbonization in the sector. But we don't really have any targeted incentives at chemicals specifically, or even industrials broadly, to enable the markets to make decisions on capital allocation in this. We've more sort of chosen technologies, and I think we'll need to get to a much smarter structure that allows more market-based decisions on how to deploy capital in this.
No, great comments. I mean, just building on your advanced reactor topic, I mean, so obviously a great example of the Dow case. But in terms of the power sector, right, a lot of hiccups there, right? I mean, and so, what's your outlook for that in the U.S., right? Because if I look globally, right, there's a lot of momentum in Asia as well. I mean, one might even argue that maybe the U.S. is not in a good competitive position. So how do you see it?
Tough but fair. That's a tough but fair assessment, I think, of the U.S. So look, we know nuclear technology can be built incredibly quickly and incredibly affordably. So if you look at what the Emirates has just done to deploy the 4 reactors at Baraka, the last one coming in at just north of $2 a watt, China being able to build the Hualong 1 and Pakistan for $3 a watt. I mean, that is the cheapest source of new clean electricity in the world, especially when you think about the 24/7, 365 characteristics of those reactors. So it can be done. In the U.S., I think our problem is we're simply so far behind on basic construction expertise. So anything that involves enormous amounts of cement and steel and elaborate project management has been much more challenging for us. We've lost some of those skills. The reactor that's being built in Georgia right now, literally every high energy welder that exists in the U.S. is on that site, and we don't have many. The next generation of reactors, though, the smaller advanced reactors, I think is where the U.S. has a chance to catch back up. To catch back up.
So, we've touched a bit on technology. We've touched a bit on some of the policy pieces. I'd love to hear maybe some examples from the group. Collaboration, as we've talked about, is going to be key. Maybe even unique collaborations that maybe would not have done in the past. I'll take our example. I think when at the origin of the LCAT initiative, at SABIC, we partnered with BASF and Linde to go develop the e-furnace for our olefin cracking technology. And maybe a few years ago, you wouldn't have had us sitting in a room debating about intellectual property and agreeing to move forward together, but it was a clear case where sharing that risk and sharing the investment made sense. But I'd love to get some feedback from the group. There are other examples of collaborations, either straightforward or complex ones that you found a way to make work, and why are those important to the transition? Maybe Gokhan, starting with you, because I know you've got some good examples, but I'd love to hear feedback from the group, because we're going to have to make these kind of collaborations work going forward.
I definitely agree with you. Actually, most of the companies mainly focus on their own sustainable R&D development projects, and that has really little good. That makes only little impact on the industry overall, but helps those specific players themselves. I think we have to go beyond that. And I have a specific example regarding one of our major companies. Corsa is a tire reinforcement company, and together with Continental, they worked on a specific technology, and they came up with a new technology called cocoon technology, and that technology is a advanced adhesion technology, and it helps connect rubber and the textile in the tire together. And then these two partners decided to license this technology free of charge to all the players that are interested in the textiles or tire industry. So basically to their competitors, and these competitors become a kind of registered member of the platform that is formed. And there is one condition to get that license for free. and that condition is that, you know, if these newcomers come up with some new patents by, you know, enhancing this existing technology, then they have to also make it available to the other users in the specific, you know, platform.
Yep.
And it is kind of a, you know, platform partnership, which is a kind of a, you know, example for, you know, just increasing the speed of developments and, you know, making a kind of, you know, catalyst move to move this industry towards net zero. I think this is a very good example. But I also, you know, am very happy with this GIC's, you know, R&D hub for plastic waste, you know, processing. And that is a very good project which, you know, brings many different players together to find some, you know, sustainable solutions in the chemical industry. I think these type of partnerships are what we really need to you know, move to net zero, you know, targets.
You know, great example, and again, yeah, when you bring competitors together and they're willing to share intellectual property and to make improvements available to each other and to the other members of the sector, that's a big change, right? That's a different approach, a different model than we're used to seeing, for sure. Any other examples maybe from the group on collaboration that we could highlight?
I'd say we're, I mean, maybe for our company, we're relatively newer into the space of sort of collaborative platforms that don't only just bring the industry together, but also opportunities to bring the value chain together. And so I think we've been very focused over the last few years on identifying where those opportunities could be to help us accelerate. So GIC being, of course, one of those where we're relatively new members, but you know, really excited about the opportunity that may offer for us to really identify some of those opportunities to de-risk, you know, whether those are investments or or other excuse me, other opportunities. And I would say, I mean, perhaps just the, you know, the other one I mentioned earlier around groups like Together for Sustainability, yep, pulling that industry group together to really focus not only on product carbon footprinting, but a whole range of other issues that helps us accelerate on this journey, you know, not only towards decarbonization, but across the wider sustainability effort. So those are two, I'd say within the circularity space, we're doing, you know, a lot across the full value chain, bringing together, you know, early waste management infrastructure all the way down to the chain towards things like chemical recycling and other things. So there we have other examples as well, but I'll probably pause there.
No, great examples. And I love that you mentioned the R&D hub as an example that came out of the GIC. So for those that aren't familiar with the early initiatives, I mean, I highlighted the e-furnace example. R&D hub is one that we launched, I guess, middle to late last year. Great example of saying how can we get, again, a large group of companies that are true competitors, but recognize that plastic circularity and decarbonization are intimately connected. Mm-hmm. That needs to be addressed. And can we advance technologies or, you know, pre-competitive together in an R&D hub where we can co-invest and deliver that set of solutions? Great example because it was complex. You know, I think the meetings to discuss how we're going to allocate IP and, you know, what does it cost and what do you get, oftentimes at the beginning are very complex. And then once you realize what everybody's benefiting, actually they become pretty straightforward. And, you know, I'm excited, you know, just building on that one that, you know, we had a recent brainstorming with the GIC, and I think we have a whole list of new initiatives like the R&D hub that are coming. So, but it does require us to think about IP differently, about how to capture value. We're still competitors. We're still in a very active competitive space. We have to look out for our company's interest to be competitive and successful. But to achieve some of these goals, they're too big for any of us to tackle on our own. So we've talked a bit about some of the policy challenges, the technology challenges, even the collaboration, some positives, but also the challenges there. But I'd love to get a perspective maybe on just how do you feel about this transition, right? I mean, you know, we can oftentimes get caught up in this discussion around the barriers to make this happen, the policy issues, the cost, the technology complexity. But I'd love to get your perspective on, you know, we look towards 2050. Is it achievable? Are we doing the right things? Are you hopeful about the future? And if not, what are the things that you think we need to push forward faster than we are? Maybe starting with you, Matthias.
Look, I'm an optimist, so I would.
That's why I started with you.
Thank you. No, so I would like us to approach this with sort of a sense of making it happen. Even though, look, let's also be clear. At the moment, we still have lots of work to do, right? So I would be hopeful that we can get this done. In terms of what's still needed, I would like to build on what was said earlier about engaging the value chain and maybe more innovative partnerships. I think engaging the value chain goes both directions. It goes on the feedstock side. I mean, if we want to work on bio-based feedstock, I mean, there is some very unique challenges associated with that, and I think we're not going to solve that any company on its own. And the other side of the value chain too, I think we talked about willingness to pay earlier. We're not going to solve the willingness to pay without explaining this to the consumer. Yeah. So we will have to partner up with companies downstream that face the consumer, sometimes even on the media side, telling stories about how this product is different and what impact it has. So that is, I think, innovative partnerships in that dimension will be important. And they will also be important innovative partnerships when it comes to some of the standard challenges. Blockchain was mentioned earlier as maybe a means for more consistent, reliable product carbon footprint across the chain. Partnerships with tech firms, with venture capital, I think in that area will get us there. So I'm optimistic, but I think it will require us, I think, to be a bit more innovative, I would say, about how we partner beyond the industry.
On that, because I mean, we talked a lot about maybe within an industry collaboration and dealing with some of the IP issues and other things, but that cross-industry collaboration between sectors is oftentimes something I see is very complex. Sometimes just because we don't speak the same language, and I mean, just in our case, knowing that we're going to have to engage differently with the power sector than we used to, as an example. Do you see any unique cross-sector collaborations, maybe Rich to you, that need to improve where they are today versus where they need to be in the future?
Well, so we're embarking on a grand experiment in the U.S., which is this concept of hubs. And so the bipartisan infrastructure law funded at remarkable scale a number of hubs for clean hydrogen production, for direct air capture and associated infrastructure, and for carbon sequestration and transportation networks. And so at the very least, the hydrogen hubs and the carbon sequestration networks will have heavy participation from the chemicals industry. And it is requiring a whole new degree of very non-organic participate. I guess is that a chemical industry joke?
Sure.
Non-organic.
That's a way to decarbonize, I guess.
Exactly. Participation and collaboration in setting these things up. Things that normally would have taken decades to gradually emerge, and lots of contractual agreements and all that are sort of being forced together in sort of quick forced marriages by the Department of Energy. But so far, there's been tremendous interest in these projects. So we've just decided to fund 7 of these very large hydrogen hubs, and that was a down select from more than 45, at least 30 of which were very large, high quality applications, many of which I think will go forward despite the lack of public funding. And these things are going to be very complex. If you just take the carbon capture and sequestration networks, the layers of complexity and issues that remain to be solved with many of those are intimidating. So we have a great record globally of sequestering 40 million tons a year of CO2 across, round numbers, 25 very large projects. But to Kokan's point earlier, that's going to have to increase maybe 2 orders of magnitude in the next decade. We don't have a site in the world that sequesters 100 million tons a year, but that is the ambition of the Greater Houston Project and the sort of the hub that's been built by Exxon and a number of other folks around that. But it's going to have to, we'll entirely rethink how you manage a CO2 sequestration project at 100 million tons a year, and all of the different participants and the new pipeline infrastructure and the contractual obligations, regulatory barriers. There's quite a bit there, but I'm optimistic. I mean, there's tremendous interest in the industry. There's tremendous participation so far, and we're actually seeing real contracts signed now, real CO2 offtake contracts at scale. Just the ones signed last year by Exxon alone will have more impact than all electric vehicles in the U.S. On the road today. So a few of these projects get us tremendous carbon impact very quickly.
Excellent. Maybe Gökhan, from your perspective, how do you look forward towards 2050? What's your perspective for Sabancı's portfolio and the challenges you have? You have a very diverse mix of industries, but how do you see it? How does your leadership team see it?
Actually, we have to be optimistic. As Matthias said, we have no other chance, in my opinion. But I see a very good progress, especially in the last decade. I look at it from the perspective of legislation and regulation. I think, according to United Nations, again, more than 140 countries, committed to these net zero targets, and that covers around 88% of the emissions. And I think that will require most of the countries, and as more or less more of these countries are getting towards that direction, to increase the regulations and policies around that to help the industries evolve. And from that perspective, I guess IRA and Net Zero Investment Act are there to support these industries. That is the first thing. And secondly, I guess there's a lot of attention investing into green energy resources. As long as we can make use of renewable energy resources, I think we will be moving towards the targets. And the interest as well as the investment into renewable energy is going to very high levels. Also considering these geopolitical tensions around the world and its impact on the oil prices, I think these investments become much more feasible. And finally, I guess we started to consider building new type of partnerships, new business models, where we combine all the participants together. And that one specific example I gave to you around Corsia and Continental and what they could really achieve by including others is a kind of an ecosystem play. As long as we can come up with such business models, which includes partners or players from the ecosystem, I think we will be there to achieve these targets for 2050, and hopefully that's going to be the case.
No, great view. Andrea, any different perspectives from your side?
I think the only thing I would add, just building on what everybody else has said, is just that we shouldn't also forget all of what we're doing, this kind of tip of this big transformation in our industry, is also this big opportunity for us to continue to attract talent into our industry. And I think that's one thing that we see, particularly given we've really accelerated our focus on sustainability, around our pathway to net zero, around our circularity transformation. And these are areas within our company that are attracting a ton of very bright people across the company, but also outside of the company. And I think this is something we continue to evaluate, is making sure that we're doing things also at this pace that we spoke about a little bit earlier. This also has this opportunity to make sure that we continue to be an industry that attracts really the best and the brightest, because we're going to need them as we continue this very complex path ahead of us.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you mentioned the talent one, because I think that's also critical, with the discussions at WEF this week, but also something we all need to recognize for our organizations, right? That a lot of the people that we're hiring today, the talent, are about purpose. They're about intent. They're looking for companies that share those values, and us taking the right steps is going to be critical to retaining the talent that we have too. But also, it's an opportunity to get the best talent if you have the right story. And I think beyond just the talent, I'd be curious thoughts from anybody in the panel, about the business opportunity itself, right? I mean, we talk about all the challenges, but you are going to have new business models. You're going to have new ways to capture value. How do you see that? Do you think there are opportunities that we could maybe pivot the thinking here to how do we create new value for the sector versus how do we avoid the costs associated with the transition? Any?
I mean, I could speak on behalf of Lyndell. We announced we launched a new corporate strategy in March of last year, and with our circularity objectives, so our launching a new product portfolio around products that deliver more towards the circular objectives that we see across different value chains, so mechanical recycling, chemical recycling, and bio-based feedstocks. Yeah. We have announced that we believe that will bring an incremental $1 billion in EBITDA by 2030. So we do see that value, being a value-adding activity for us as we continue on this transformation. As it relates to sort of the low carbon, I think we're still in that phase of understanding that in much more detail and focusing on that as we are across the company. But certainly we have committed to that across our company.
No, perfect. I'm glad you did the example there because I think it's important that everybody recognizes, especially even maybe within our companies as we drive this transition, culturally, that we can pivot that dialogue from the risk and the cost to the opportunity. Yeah. Did you want to make a comment?
I'll just add as well. I mean, we spend so much, chemical sector industry broadly spends so much on using an incredibly valuable feedstock, which would be natural gas, and burning it for heat, right? And the U.S. National Renewable Energy Laboratory has looked at this very closely. Once you get them to scale, it is a lot cheaper to make heat by splitting electrons than by burning methane. And so all of their analyses of getting process heat from nuclear to scale, even in the very, very competitive domestic U.S. natural gas regime, show that it would be a net positive for everyone going after that, even given all the other complexities of running a nuclear reactor in the midst of a chemical plant. But especially as the U.S. goes forward and expands our LNG export capacity and our domestic price regime becomes more and more linked with the world, which might have a 2 or 3x multiplier on our domestic gas prices, finding ways to take advantage of that and become less reliant on burning gas for just basic therms in our processes, I think is an enormous economic opportunity for our industry.
Great. Mike, we're getting close to kind of where we want to try to start wrapping things a little bit, but maybe I'll put it to you this way. I mean, obviously share any concluding thoughts you want, but since we have many of the GIC members as well as the companies that are interested in joining the GIC here, as well as some of the staff from the GIC, if you think about any concluding comments, I'd love for you to also put a challenge of what do you want to see? What do you think the GIC needs to do that's unique, and what should we pressure that whole organization and all the members to drive for? So if you've got an example or an idea or at least an aspiration you want to push, I'd love to hear the feedback from that. Anyone? Yeah.
I think the GIC can play a very unique role on the trust side. I think it goes back to the theme of the forum overall. I think this is going to require trust in all directions, trust with talent, trust with stakeholders, trust with consumers, trust amongst different players in the chemical industry, and I think the GIC is very uniquely positioned to do so. So that's, I think, a great role to play.
Comment. Yeah. Any others?
I'd say come to DC more, tell the story to policymakers more.
Yep.
As intimidating as that prospect may be right now. Yeah.
No, but I think it is a good challenge that the policy and input to the policy forums is a critical piece that needs to come from the GIC to help enable the solution. So it's the right challenge. We probably just need to go to DC, but also to Brussels.
Also, also Brussels.
As well as a number of other locations too.
All of the policy capitals. Yeah.
Andrea?
I think I know we're already doing this in the GIC, but making sure we're not only looking within our industry, but obviously across the value chain, because there's lots of opportunities.
Yeah, and you're a very new member, so any challenge you have for the group coming in?
Yes, obviously. Actually, when I look at the ecosystem itself and what is being tried to achieved by GIC, I think the major things that we need are innovation and collaboration, I think we can use the power of GIC to foster, broad partnerships, and also, invest into new technologies. Yeah. And by doing so, I think we can achieve what we want to achieve. And only together, we can achieve in some of the things, because this is a complex industry, and we have to combine and join the forces.
Excellent. No, great comments, and I just want to thank all the speakers. I think we had clear messages around this trust issue, around transparency, collaboration, engagement within our sector, engagement with partners, engagement with policymakers to drive influence and to drive impact, collaboration with new models, and also focusing on the opportunity as opposed to the risk. I think we have a huge challenge ahead of us, but I think we have the right players getting involved to make this happen. I would say anyone that's interested in joining the GIC, please engage with us, because I think that the more that we can bring across sectors and within our sector to the table, the more impact we can have. I think we have just a few minutes left. If there are any questions from the audience, we certainly could take some. Otherwise, we can bring it to a close. But if there's a question from anyone? Okay. Thank you all very much. Great session.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.